Hello out there, Lauren Jackson again, speech language pathologist, and I'm back again this week to have another quick chat with you guys about some of my thoughts on language development to try and help you in your home environment as we try to navigate this new way of learning. So I thought if we delved a little deeper into what I think about language development, that hopefully it can help some of you think about your interactions with your children at home and what maybe you could do to enhance some of those communication interactions. So, in the spirit of trying to learn as our students learn, many of our students learn visually. So I wanted to come up with a visual representation of what I'm talking about today. And the visual representation that makes the most sense to me is to think about language development as a staircase. So I think this is a decent staircase. I had to draw it before I started the video, otherwise I would have just been speaking gibberish or there would have been long moments of silence. So we're going to talk today about language development as a staircase, okay? So first off, at the bottom of the staircase, you know, in a staircase, the bottom step has to be secure and strong. It has to be there, or you're going to be making these big, giant, awkward leaps to try to get up the staircase. We want that bottom step to be safe and secure. And when we're talking about language development, what I'm talking about is engagement and regulation. So these things need to be in place before we start really communicating and really using our language. So what do I mean by that? If you listened to my talk last week on the eggs in a basket theory, I was kind of talking a little bit about it then, about how our bodies need to be kind of in this calm stasis place in order to best communicate. So our bodies need to be regulated. We need to be taking in information visually and auditorily as normally as possible. We need to be calm. We need to be engaged with our partner. The definition of communication is that it is a two-way act. If you are speaking into the void and there is nobody there to receive it and act on what you are communicating, are you really truly communicating? No, because it's not changing anything. It's that whole if a tree falls in the forest kind of thing, right? If you are communicating and there's no one on the other end, it's not communicating. You might be talking, but you're not communicating with somebody. There has to be a back and a forth. So that's where engagement comes in. You have to be engaged with the child in order for that communication piece to happen, for them to process what you were saying and to then speak or communicate in whatever way they're going to communicate back to you. So if the child is not there, if their body is not regulated, if they're thinking about the tag in the back of their shirt, if they're focused on the light that's blinking up in the ceiling, if they know a fire drill is coming and are holding their ears and waiting for that bell to ring, they're not regulated and they're not ready to communicate with you. So we really need this engagement piece and this regulation piece to start strong in order for the child to get up to the next step, which is language. So if you think about babies develop language. Typically they start speaking anywhere from somewhere, in the 9 to 15 month range is usually when we start to hear those first words coming in. And if you think about that, what has been building over all that time with babies and how they develop? They're learning how to regulate their bodies, and they're learning to engage with their families and their parents and their caregivers. That engagement is happening and starting, and then they can make those connections and start having those moments of communication with their most trusted caregivers. So the language really does develop later. I know my daughter, I was really worried about her language. As a speech therapist, I wanted her to talk early, but for my little girl, she was a mover. She was moving and crawling and walking really early. her little brain was so focused on her body movements that she wasn't ready to focus on her language. But once she started walking and said, oh, cool, I got this, then the words came. And once they came, they did not stop. So I think our kids on the spectrum are a lot like that. Sometimes this engagement and regulation piece takes a lot longer, but eventually once they start getting here, then some of the language can start coming. And then the top step is what happens when we have good control of our language, and that is higher level thinking and cognition. So problem solving, learning to take their language and their knowledge, putting it together to solve problems, learning how to do all that tricky school stuff like reading and doing math. All of that happens after this development is in place. All right, so then let's think about our kids on the spectrum, right? One thing that I hear from a lot of families of a lot of kids on the spectrum, I've heard this so many times, they'll come to me and they'll say, oh, my kid has words. I know my kid has words. They just don't use them. Absolutely. 100%. I agree with that. 100%. They have words. They have a lot of words. I would argue that most of our students have a huge knowledge of vocabulary and language, might be even commensurate with what a typically developing child of that age has, or advanced. We know so many kids on the spectrum are hyperlexic or have those splinter skills where they, can achieve great memorization and things like that. I believe that that language is absolutely there, but there are things that are preventing it from coming out. Things have gone wrong on this ladder staircase of development. So what I think happens, and this is my theory, I don't have research to cite which is telling you this is true. This is just what I believe and have seen over my years as a speech therapist. We get, as these children develop, some gaping holes in these lower level language skills, this lower level development. Holes develop. Their engagement is spotty. They are not regulated. They are not able to connect with us for very long. They're not able to sustain that back and forth communication, which is how so many of us develop our language skills. So there are holes in the steps that are going to make it very difficult to get from this bottom step up to this language step. So we've got a lot of kids on the spectrum that are kind of stuck here in this middle step in what I'm going to call rote language land. So they have words like, I want juice, I want TV, I want movie. Some kids will even jump to no, I don't like that. Or then you'll start hearing various scripts, right? So that echolalia stuff starts happening. So a lot of our kids are kind of stuck here in rote language land because that engagement and regulation piece has made it really difficult for them to get up these steps up to the higher levels. There are holes there because the engagement and the regulation piece is missing. So what can we do? We can encourage them to hold on to the banister. If you think about going up a pair of old steps in a rickety house, I would assume some of you have had some kind of experience like that. You are constantly looking down to make sure you're stepping in a place that's safe and secure, but there is always something to grab onto on the side, and that is the banister. And in terms of language development, their banister is their intrinsic motivation. So we all know that for a lot of our kids, that motivation to talk is tricky. It's very difficult to motivate a child to speak who doesn't have it intrinsically. We can attempt it by using external things. So withholding toys that they want until they ask for it. We can withhold snacks that they want until they ask for it. We can demand work and then reward them with that desired item, but that's only going to last for so long. Eventually, they're going to get tired of that and just say, it's not worth it. I'm not going to communicate. Those extrinsic motivation, the prompting, the rewarding, it only works for so long and it only gets you so far. I would argue that it can only get you here, stuck in that middle space where that rote language is. We're just asking for what we want and we're getting it. We're manding and tacting, if you want to use verbal ABA kind of behavior language. We get to that manding and tacting stage where we're requesting, but that we don't get much more than that. What builds the child's ability to really communicate is getting that intrinsic motivation. And I just don't think you can bribe that into a kid, that intrinsic deep motivation to talk. I believe what can get them to develop that intrinsic motivation is working on this bottom step as much as possible, getting them to engage with you, getting them regulated and getting their sensory piece in place. I can't express to you how important I think that bottom step is. Only when we start working on this and repairing those holes can our child then feel safe and secure enough to grab onto that banister and make it further up the language development scale. So I hope that makes sense. It makes a lot of sense in my head. I think that for my next video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about using what I call communication temptations to increase some of that intrinsic motivation that can help you guys. So I think that's what my next video is going to be. But what I want you to take away from this is that the bottom step, that engagement and regulation, making that secure so that our children can feel safe to take risks and move themselves further up that staircase, that is what is going to be the quickest and most long-term solution to this language development. Sitting a kid down and doing drills all day is only going to get your child to be successful on those drills in those conditions. You have to sort of expand your way of thinking and think about engaging with them on their level as much as possible as the way in to start repairing some of those holes. It's going to be different. Engaging for me with some of my students in the past, we did speech in a tent in her bedroom because she liked being in enclosed spaces. We would do speech with her TV while she rewound everything because that was a calming place for her to be. But I sat down with her and I did that with her, and it built a bond. She engaged and connected with me, and it helped her to feel comfortable enough to communicate with me. So that's what I want you guys to think about, and I'll be back with another video soon talking about some of those communication temptations that we can help to build our language. Okay guys, I hope everyone's doing well, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.